We are the Rouge research family, and this is who we are. I'm Dr. Chris Hough.
And Tariq Mahmood.
And we have a virtual member of our research family, Professor Eddie Abbott-Halpin, who has an involvement in our primary research work from afar, it's true, the Orkney College on the Orkney Islands, but we are genuinely a team. So we wanted to give you a very short intro that would give you a feel for our context. We are unusual. We don't just look unusual, but we work, we feel, in an unusual way. Whilst we are co-researchers and a team, we're very much a family. And we wanted to do this short intro just to give you an idea of the different perspectives that we bring as a collective and as individuals to our research work. We've got various handouts. Please take or peruse. I'll refer to them briefly in the PowerPoint presentation. And just to set things in complete perspective, I was invited to work with Rouge in about 2013, and I was introduced to them. They are a third sector organisation. We're all from the northwest of England, and I was introduced to them by an academic colleague. And this was at the University of Central Lancashire. And my own research at that time was in the area of education provision in Her Majesty's prisons. And when I met Tariq and Hanif, they had, well, their history timeline is there. They had actually done a survey of the needs of Muslim ex-offenders and their families, and they had also developed their own three-stage model of rehabilitation and reintegration for prisoners. So we procured funding. If I fast forward to 2016, we procured some funding, 2014, some funding, because we thought it would be a good idea if I could do an independent evaluation of their three-stage model of rehabilitation. However, we hadn't bargained with Chris Grayling, I shan't say that name again, and the dreaded transforming rehabilitation arrangements, which, as you will, I'm sure, know, have decimated the probation services and the rehabilitation of short-term offenders. However, having got the money, we proceeded, but the transforming rehabilitation agenda militated against us having any referrals of Muslim offenders for all sorts of reasons, the outcomes of which are in an article which we had published in the European Journal of Probation. And I wrote it, really, to damn the transforming rehabilitation arrangements more than anything, but it makes quite grim but very interesting reading. Fast forwarding to 2016, as a collective, we did procure funding from the Barrow Cadbury Trust, I'm delighted to say, and today's presentation is about our primary research, which is called Faith, Family and Crime. Tariq, over to you for a short word about Rouge.
Thank you, Chris. As Chris mentioned, Rouge, we've been supporting Muslim families, offenders, since about 2007. Our work's always been client-led, and Rouge actually started working within prisons. Then we moved on into the communities, working with BAME third sector and families. And the whole purpose of that was just to raise the awareness of the needs of BAME and Muslim offenders at the time. More recently, the work with the families, the focus with the CB Cadbury Barrow Trust is around the families and their needs, and obviously Chris is going to be talking about that.
The findings.
In more detail about the findings, so I'm not really going to go into too much detail. As she's mentioned, there's a lot of literature available that explains about the history of Rouge, how, why we were set up, and more importantly, about today's, why we're here today. Rouge website will be up and running within a couple of weeks, so all the details of all these reports and any additional information will be on there. And if you do have any questions in relation to the presentation that Chris is going to give,
chip in if you
just
need
chip
to.
in
Just
if you need
briefly.
to. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. Okay. So I thought we'd start this. Our primary research has led us to some very interesting findings that we think are unique. And those two quotes, I think, say a great deal. I'm sorry about PowerPoint slides, but sometimes one picture says 1,000 words. Kimberly Crenshaw has written about intersectionality since the 80s, and it started with her research work into black female offenders. And I think this says it all. People of different colour, difference, whatever that might be, are too different to be the same as what? Us, white, middle class, working class, but also they're too similar to be different. So what she's saying there is, in the 80s, she was arguing against treating black women in the same way, black women offenders, in the same way as black male offenders. And you will see as we go through this short show, we're looking at gender, crime, mental health, all these factors make up individual people, whether they are black, Muslim, South Asian, white, or whatever. So I just wanted to make that point quite clearly at the start. So we've been led to draw from our findings, Muslims should be treated as a distinct social group, but so should any group or individual of difference. This is the research project. We wanted to explore Muslim families' involvement with the criminal justice sector and its impact on their health and social needs, all of which was born out of Arouge's survey in 2014, the Transforming Rehabilitation Experience, and that's what led to this work that we wanted to do. A brief snapshot from the work that Arouge has done, really that's just there to show you they've worked in prisons, they've worked on their own survey, they have run workshops for Muslim female prisoners at HMP Style in the Northwest, and they also in 2016 became third party for hate crime, and then bringing us right up to date with Faith, Family and Crime, which is published research. That's just to put a little bit more of Arouge's context. These are the things that we've had published. The European Journal article. Invisible Walls is a study that we have completed and analysed, but it has yet to be published. And there's Faith, Family and Crime, which is on the Barrow Cadbury Trust website, if you are interested in following that up. And that's why we've brought a copy of the exec summary for you to take. So elsewhere, social media about Arouge, well, we've got, I have my own Twitter account at the moment. We're hoping to change that and open up a new Arouge Twitter account, but also we're getting known. As well as the Barrow Cadbury website, the National Information Centre for Children of Offenders has also taken our project and they've put that on their website. I put that there because, don't forget, it's not just about offenders, it's about their families, the children of the children in the families. So we're very pleased and proud about that. Is that run? It's HM Prison and Probation Services. So we're very proud of that. Okay, so why Muslims? I'm sure you all know this. Muslims are significantly overrepresented in prisons, and they have been for quite a long time now. Over 15% of the prison population. 15% of the prison population, yet they are 4% of the overall country population. And the outcomes of the research that Arouge conducted in 2014 showed us actually what the particular needs of Muslim families, offenders and children are. So that's where the rationale came, where the reasoning came. Why families? Good question. It's an area in which there is a conspicuous lack of research. And if you read our exec summary, or our full report, we drew very heavily from a Canadian study by Professor Stacey Hannam. That's the only piece of research work, I think, Tarek, isn't it, that we've found of any substance that covers families in the whole paradigm of crime, offending and rehabilitation. So we wanted to discover what the impacts of the criminal justice system in Great Britain are on Muslim families and what are their social, emotional and health needs, because they're different. They are a group of individuals and groups, they have particular specific needs, which is what we'll share with you. Bit more detail, we were going to go in depth to look at the attitudes of Muslim families towards offenders in their household, and the findings will reflect this. We wanted to explore and find out some of the barriers faced by Muslim families. Goodness me, that was a revelation. Not the things that you would expect. We also wanted to look more closely at the role of Muslim families and faith organisations, most of which we did find out were the mosques, although Arouge is a faith organisation as a charity. And we wanted to produce some findings that will be of benefit to Muslim families and, dare I say, policymakers who, despite the Lammy Report, despite the Young Review, to which Hanif contributed, no change has occurred to support Muslim offenders and families. So we wanted to see and help with an increased understanding of how involvement with the CJS affects the family, nuclear and extended, And we wanted to do an analysis of any underlying issues that affected different family members, and it is significant. Partners, children, extended nuclear family members as well. And to look also at the levels of awareness amongst Muslim families of the support services that are available to them. This was all, this drove why we did it. So why Rouge? 10 years working in HM prisons, 10 years working to rehabilitate and reintegrate offenders and ex-offenders, 7 years working very closely, I mean, we're reaffirming this, but working with the Muslim families in the community to help them cope with their experiences. And the work that they did was unpaid until I think the first funding you had was 2011. And then we had the Barakat, that's important. And then we had the Barakat funding in 2016. So we get to the findings. These categories emerged from our data analysis, and if I use the word intersectionality, I'm not trying to sound clever, but they are intersecting, they overlap. And this is a snapshot of what we found. Faith, yes, but culture, family, and family structure actually, health, crime and gender, more of which in a moment, and the lack of support services. Now these all intersected to different extents to make most of the respondents very unique and individual. So there they all are. And this really is an important takeaway. If you don't take anything else away today, I hope you take this. Difference, we found, can be used to separate and divide. And we're all aware of that because it's about prejudice and discrimination. And I live in the Lake District. And when I've done teaching in Cumbria, which you might think is beautiful, which it is, I have never come across such racial prejudice in my whole life, because we are a monoculture to all intents and purposes, and difference is hated. We identified from our data analysis that Muslim families experience loneliness and isolation within their own families, as well as in society at large, which shocked me. And their criminal justice sector experiences were complex, and all of these factors interconnected and overlapped to make up unique sets of circumstances for each family and each respondent that we spoke to. And the intersectionality, I chose this because the new regulator for social work England, has got a new logo. I quite like that. There's a thread from the top, ticking the box, somebody talking to somebody else, right the way down to a social worker speaking to somebody else, right the way down to wielding, I suppose that's justice down there with a mallet in a court of justice. But I think that thread intersects and links very neatly visually what we're trying to say here. So these were some of the findings. These were the key ones. Yes, of the people that we interviewed, just under 100% were suffering, without exception, from negative and sometimes extreme mental and physical problems as a direct result of their involvement with the CJS. Muslim men, and I can say this because I'm working with 2 Muslim men, in the majority of cases, and this chimes in with our keynote speech, one of the 9 theses of reform, in the majority of cases, Muslim men do not inform the women in the family when family members have been arrested and are going through the legal court processes. Now, I was completely taken aback by this. It'll be explained in a bit more detail in a moment. Muslim families have very little information about the criminal justice sector. Probably so do a lot of white families, but for various linguistic, faith, culture, family reasons, Muslim families have desperately little information. The factors that are specifically linked to Muslim families' faith and their family culture, for which read also structure, present barriers to them accessing support services for a variety of reasons, amongst which are the shame, the stigma or the izzat that they experience, also language, English as a second language. And this is what the people told us. Imams and mosques do not engage with, nor do they provide, support to families who are going through the process of the criminal justice sector, which I think is a seriously key factor, because if the mosque doesn't support you as a family, who will? 26% of the respondents specifically stated that the wrong crowd, or the local older lads who had flashy cars, there's a drug implication here, I think, were to blame for grooming the family member into crime. That would be common, I think, across different groups and individuals, but we've wanted to record it. And this is, one picture speaks 1,000 words. I found out from my other son, that he, the family member, had been arrested. I never realised he was doing this. I didn't realise the extent. That's a mum who had no knowledge of her son's criminal activities. The men in the family dealt with everything. I had no idea until he was in prison. Imagine the trauma, the mental health, and the serious shock of that. I had suffered from depression, had to take medication. Initially, I couldn't eat or sleep. This is a common picture. I suffered from anxiety attacks for many months. I only realised how important this, now this was, we would like to take this further, the pre-sentencing report is, because it affects the sentence handed out. So if they had no knowledge or understanding of the son or the daughter's arrest, custody, sentence, until the sentence, how could they possibly influence what few probation officers we have left, then in selecting and providing a sentence that fits the context of the offender? Our organisation, the mosque, should be doing more to stop the young ones from getting involved with drugs. My imam struggled to answer some basic questions. I wonder what our keynote speaker would have to say about that. His new friends at university, this is a very typical, his new friends at university are to blame. No, they're not. He's not to blame. That's a mother. My father says the son's to blame. So blame kept on coming up. We'd like to follow that point up as well. English language support is needed for Muslims, but families won't speak up. They hide away. And the prison officers don't understand cultural issues and feelings. A very common response from our respondent. I've repeated this because this is something, it came up, we held a symposium in 2016 to follow up the transforming rehabilitation research. And the pre-sentencing report, wasn't it? It was a youth offending team from Lancashire said, we don't know anything about the families because they won't talk to us about their sons, Muslim families. So of course, the pre-sentencing report doesn't reflect these cultural and family and faith issues that need to be taken into account. So we have some recommendations, everybody. For the criminal justice sector, we say solicitors and other professional advisors should be aware of the impact of traditional family structures on the relatives. Pre-sentence report writers should highlight the cultural environment and the support structures offered in the community, if there are any, for defendants. For the health services, GPs and mental health services should be aware of the profound impact, particularly on the women in the family, of having a relative in the CJS. It's joined up services, they're not. Charities, funders, they should be aware of the specific cultural issues and needs of Muslim families. Again, not just South Asian Muslims, but Muslim families in general. Funders should ensure that organisations they fund have explicit action strategies, I wish, to include Muslim and other excluded client groups. And in the communities, there's a message to take away there. Mosques and imams should have training to enable them to provide support and counselling to meet the needs of Muslim families and relatives within the CJS. Those with influence in the community should encourage heads of families to involve women relatives in discussion of important issues affecting the families. So, what we need now to implement these recommendations, well, the Lammy Report has been and gone, the Young Review's been and gone. We need philanthropists and entrepreneurs. The policymakers aren't listening, they're too embedded and entrenched in their own squabbles, I think now. To take forward, we have a model for family support that we would like to put into practice. So, any suggestions? There we are. And our emails are on that takeaway.